QUT acknowledges the First Nations owners of the lands on where we gather today and pay our respects to the elders, laws, customs and creation spirits of this country. For thousands of years, the First Nations owners have gathered to share their knowledge and stories. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and acknowledge the important role they play within our communities. We recognise their long and continuing connection to country, the lands, winds and waters throughout Australia. We recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, researching and learning.
Hello everyone and welcome to our very first PCC4U Educator webinar for 2021. It's very lovely to see so many people here today. We're hosting the webinar today from PCC4U headquarters, which is in Brisbane at QUT, and that is on Yagara and Turrbal country. And as we get started, I'd like you to just introduce yourselves in the chat. And if you know the traditional owners of the lands that you're working on today, please enter that into your introduction as well. While you're doing that, I'll just like to introduce you to the PCC4U team who is on the webinar today. First, we have Kylie Ash, who is our National Project Manager. And you may not be able to see Kylie because there's so many other participants on board, but you'll be seeing Kylie shortly. We have Linda Carnew, who's our Project Officer and Senior Research Assistant. And many of you may have spoken with Linda or had emails to and from her through the PCC4U email. Also on with us today, Steph Dickinson and myself are Learning and Development Coordinators working across PCC4U and PEPA. And I would just like to acknowledge the hard work that Steph's doing right now to make sure that all of this runs smoothly. She certainly does have the busy seat today. We'd also want to just acknowledge our project lead, Professor Patsy Yates. I don't know if she's on at the moment, but she's maybe joining us at some point. And finally, just wanted to welcome our guest presenter today, Dr. Anna Hatton from University of Queensland, who we'll be hearing from later in the program. Okay, thank you for those of you who are putting introductions into the chat. It's very lovely to see that and to see where you're all coming from. We did want to find out a little bit more about you now, so we're going to just run a Zoom poll with a few questions for you to answer. That poll should be coming up on your screen shortly. And there are 5 questions altogether. So wow, people from all over, lots of different lands represented. Don't be too concerned if you have a poor internet connection with the camera on, that's quite all right. You can still listen and participate using the chat function there. Okay. I think that maybe everybody who's completing the poll has completed the poll. Is anyone still working on it? Wave madly. Okay, we're just going to have a quick look at those results. So we've got reasonable numbers from Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales here with us today. And we want a quick shout out to all of those New South Wales and Victorian people who are here an hour early. I hope you got to go and have some lunch in the meantime and do something nice with your time. We also have quite a number of nurses represented and then a reasonable number of other groups as well. So thank you for that. And university sector, RTO sector and hospital and health sector also fairly evenly represented. Now this number 4 question was something that we were interested to know. So some of you have quite a lot of experience using the PCC4U resources and some are just at that early stage. So we're hoping to be able to provide something for everybody today, wherever you're at. And thanks again for those of you who've agreed to be recorded. Okay. All right, so we will now start off with a brief project update from Kylie Ash. Thanks, Kylie.
Hello, my name is Kylie and I'm the National Project Manager for PCC4U. I'd just like to thank you for joining us for our first webinar and acknowledge the great team that we have in PCC4U. We're led by Professor Patsy Yates and we have researchers and our learning and development team as well. And I'd certainly like to acknowledge the work of Sharon and Steph in bringing together this webinar. The PCC4U project has been funded by the Australian Government Department of Health since the early 2000s. And the work that was completed in those early stages with research and development, piloting and national rollout have really solidified a great foundation for the project that we see today. And we have been refunded over the next 3 years. We'll be doing a lot more work with our amazing resources that we have just completed again, to really evaluate and be able to showcase the resources that we've developed. And underpinning all of this has been our consistent aim, which is to improve the skill and confidence of the health workforce and support people ultimately who have palliative care needs. And we're working with universities to embed the resources within undergraduate and postgraduate curricula. And we've also extended our work over the last couple of years to work within the vocational education and training sector. One of the great things that we have achieved in the last 12 months has been to update our PCC4U website with the core modules and focus topics. So hopefully you have all had a chance to visit our new website at pcc4u.org.au. We've really spent some time having a look at the existing resources, mapping them to our national standards, updating content to ensure that it was contemporary, updating the links, and just refreshing essentially our look and feel. So we now have a suite of new resources with the implementation guide, blueprint and USB that are available if you'd like to grab those online, or we can also send hard copies to educators. But that's been a great achievement in the last 12 months. The core modules support the achievement of graduate capabilities in palliative care, and the focus topics support learning about palliative care in specific populations and contexts. The modules all follow a case study, providing really rich audiovisual stimuli for learners. It also includes evidence-based content and these case study vignettes and learning activities. And these provide opportunities to explore key practice concepts, understanding the experience of individuals living with a life-limiting illness, consider expert opinions and experiences of practice in the field, and identify and review current evidence and information resources. So the Palliative Care Education LMS is a shared platform with Pepper and ELK. And the LMS has really given us an opportunity to deliver different types of education. So we've branched out into e-learning modules. And I think moving into the future will really provide opportunities for further communication and also collaboration. So the LMS can be freely accessed via a free registration, and on our PCC4U area of the LMS you can access the Care Worker Toolkit, our Enrolled Nurse Toolkit, the Simulation Scenario e-learning resources, and our new Educator Community Hub, which I know we'll be talking about at the end of this webinar, so I won't go any further on that. So on the LMS, we have two simulation scenario e-learning modules. One is teacher facing, and this has all of the background information, scenario setup, clinical documents, handover videos, and simulation videos to assist a teacher in developing and running their own simulated activity. The simulation case follows the gentleman with pancreatic cancer and develops capabilities around communication, teamwork and pain management. And then the student version has the videos where the students can reflect on the simulation scenarios. The Enrolled Nurse Toolkit is also housed on our LMS, and it is a suite of 27 individual e-learning sessions. And this toolkit is mapped to the Unit of Competency HLT ENN010, which is the palliative care elective within the Enrolled Nurse Training Package. The Care Worker Toolkit similarly is mapped to CHC PAL 001, which is a unit of competency within Certificate 3 and Certificate 4 programs which prepare care workers. And this was released just last year, so really proud of its development. So where to from now? I really see the next few years solidifying our work with educators to really continue to increase capacity of educators to deliver palliative care education, supporting them through the Community Hub, this webinar series, communications through social media, and partnering to evaluate the outcomes of PCC4U. We want to try and increase the embedding of education resources regarding caring for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and looking towards what other resources should we be including in the PCC4U suite, perhaps looking at perinatal focus, repackaging the Health Fusion Teen Challenge case study, and how do we strengthen the allied health inclusion in the resources. So really value your input and look forward to any comments or questions that you may have. So please feel free to add them to the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. We'll also have some time later on just for a general open forum question and answer. So you'll be able to ask any questions about the PCC4U resources then. But as Kylie said, please feel free to put any questions you might have into the chat. And Linda's going to be answering some questions as we go along. So yes, please feel free to either jot them down for later or pop them into the chat now. So the next part of our webinar, we're going to do a topic presentation on engaging learners in palliative care content. And the intention of this part of the webinar is to provide a demonstration or perhaps some experiential learning to highlight one way of using some of the introductory PCC4U resources in a face-to-face session. So we're going to run through a number of activities, and I really hope that you are able to participate in the activities and that you enjoy taking part today. So the first activity that we're going to look at asks us to think about some of the words that we use in our culture to refer to death without actually saying the D word. Now we're going to share our whiteboard with you, so please feel free to write up there some of the words or phrases that you've heard or maybe you've used in practice to refer to death. If you haven't used a whiteboard screen like this before and you want to find the tools to access typing or writing, if you go to the top of the screen and click on View Options and then choose Annotate, then you can also, you'll find the typing and writing tools there. Some people have already found it, that's fantastic. So yeah, just feel free to type them in. So it doesn't take us long to come up with quite a number of sayings and expressions that we hear used and say ourselves. Popping clogs I haven't heard for a long time. That's a unique one. Falling off the perch, kick the bucket, no longer with us. Pushing up daisies, heading south, gone to a better place. There's a lot of passed away, passed overs. Leaving this world. Is that what I'm reading? My screen's not quite there. It's a Dutch thing, the clogs. Okay, pop the clogs, kick the bucket, 6 feet under. So thank you for those offerings. I can see they're still coming in. We'll leave it up for just a little minute more. Given the range of responses that we can see there, I'd just like to pose a question to the whole group. And you can just use the Zoom functions to say yes or no to this question. But do you think that our modern Western society is a death-denying or death-avoiding culture? So you can do a quick yes or no using in your participants function there. Yes, or you can put it into the chat. Lots of yeses. Yes, we're getting better.
Not so much anymore. Yeah.
So we have a couple of, we have about a minute. I wondered if somebody from who answered yes to that would like to give us some of their thoughts about why they answered yes, and you can raise your hand in the Zoom function. That would be the best way. We may not be able to see you on our screen if you're just raising your actual hand. So raise your virtual hand. And then perhaps somebody who answered no would like to give us a comment about why they might have answered no. If you'd rather not speak out loud, then of course you can put your yes and no reasoning into the chat as well. Is there anybody who wants to give us a comment or share their thoughts about why they said yes? I can't see any hands raised.
I don't know how to raise the hand.
Do you have a comment to say, Cheryl?
Well, I would suggest that while we still have a trial of life going on in acute care for someone who's dying, we are going to be a death-denying society. Mm-hmm. So we have a trial of life, but we don't afford anyone the privilege of having a trial of a good death. Shouldn't say that, should I? The GD, sorry. That's my contribution. I was just writing about the trial of life this morning, so it's very fresh in my mind. So the trial of life is often, I don't know about anyone else's experience, but it's a phenomenon that's just become part of the vernacular, and it's almost like we can't question it. So, you know, a profound comorbidities, long-standing history, someone with Parkinson's disease and dementia and a urinary tract infection and pneumonia, and what is the trial of life and where is it situated in acute care, and what are we trying to avoid?
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
I would like to say that I think that acute care seems to have more issues than aged care or home palliative care. I think for some reason the medicos can't come to terms with the fact that someone is actually going to die and they can't not do something about it. And I think that's why those issues that Cheryl mentioned are probably more significant in acute care than in the other areas of palliative care, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jen. We might have time for one more comment if there's one more person. I think somebody said they saw it changing. I thought it was changing at the moment. Jessica?
Oh, I had my hand up, but I wasn't the one who typed that comment about changing.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I can't see all of the hands at once anyway. So please give us your.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting. So I teach undergraduate students, but my background's palliative care, occupational therapy. And it's interesting even with palliative care in that a lot of the students choose not to attend those tutorials or are scared to engage in those tutorials because they're scared of what they might face. They're scared of the idea of even talking about death, which sort of suggests on an average everyday perspective that they aren't talking about it. They're not exposed to it generally, and they're often quite scared to even broach the subject or come to a class.
Yeah, that's I think that's something that other people find as well, particularly with the undergraduate, and we might hear more in Anna's presentation about that as well. All right, we might move on now to our next activity. Certainly, if you've got other comments, please put them or continue putting them into the chat. We will be saving the chat as well and posting it on our learning management system after the webinar, so you can go back through and see people's comments and some of the responses too. So the next activity encourages us to think about our own life expectancy, which can be a good way to start people talking about dying and death. So we're going to share a link in the chat now to an online life expectancy calculator called the Death Clock. If you've got that, you can see that in your chat. Now just click on the link and it will take you to the website. Hopefully it doesn't disappear off your screen too quickly with all the other comments coming through. Once you find that, open that up and just fill in the details that it's asking for there if you're comfortable to do that. It will ask you for a few personal details which can be used to determine the age at which you're likely to die. While you're doing that, I just need to remind you that the Death Clock is intended to just be a fun activity, and it is unlikely to actually predict the date of your death. That's our little disclaimer there. When you have a result from the Death Clock, post your result, if you're happy with doing that, into the Zoom chat, and then tell us what your reaction was. How do you feel about that? What was the first thought that came into your mind when you saw your death date, as it were? When I did it, it told me I was going to live till 86, which I think it was, I realised I'll be able to live through my children having their midlife crises, potentially getting to their 50 to 60th birthdays. Someone's happy with being 82 as long as you're a good 82. That's good as well. I think quite a number of people are anticipating living until they to see our net zero carbon emissions, perhaps in the 2050. Maybe not. 88 years. Anna, that's all the cycling. 91. Okay, there's a fair few of you that need to probably check your super. Make sure you've got enough to keep you going until your 90s. A conscientious objector who wants their death to be a surprise. I like it. Very good. All right. So we might move on to our last activity in this section. We're going to introduce you to William for this activity, who is one of somebody over 100. Sorry, I just saw that. Linda, got to get that retirement plan. Sorry, we're going to introduce you to William, who is one of the PCC4U case scenario characters. We've got a short video to show you that just provides some information about William's background and life experiences. Thank you, Steph.
Just send it back within 30 days and we'll give you your money back. That's a 30-day risk-free money-back guarantee. So you've got nothing to lose. So what are you waiting for? Call 1-800-1.
That means this fella come over for the pipes yet?
Nah. Do you want a cup of tea?
Yeah, that'd be great. I always thought I had good genes. Both my mum and dad lived until they were well in their 90s, so I thought, good outside chance I might live to a ripe old age too. That is until recently. I discovered that when I went to the toilet, there was blood on the paper and in the bowl. Now he wants me to go and have a colonoscopy. He wants to look up inside the bowel. It's a bit of a worry. You know, you don't even think about dying until someone sends you off for a test just like this one.
There you go, love.
Then you're convinced you're going to have cancer. You're not going to be able to do all the things you want to do with your life.
So in a moment, we're going to spend about 5 minutes in a breakout room to discuss a couple of questions around William's story. We want you to have a think about how William's background and life experiences influence the way he responds to a potential diagnosis of life-limiting illness. And after that, we want you to think about and share how your background and life experiences might influence your response in a similar situation. We've put together a Padlet or an online collaboration space so that each group can write their responses to the questions. The link for this is in the Zoom chat now. So before we start the breakout rooms, just open up that link. You'll see a page that's called William's Story. Our hope is that there will be at least one person in each of the breakout rooms who can actually access the Padlet. So don't worry too much if you have some trouble with it. Before we start our breakout rooms, just need to, or would like to give you a few other instructions. We're going to allocate breakout rooms at random, so you will no doubt find that you're in a room with people you haven't met before. So please take some time to introduce yourselves before you dive into the questions. If you need assistance at any time in your breakout rooms, you can click on the Ask for Help button and then invite host, and we'll be there. I also want to point out that the breakout rooms will not be recorded as part of the session, so feel free to speak freely. Finally, I'd like to remind you that there's no right or wrong answers here. You'll have 5 minutes to talk, and remember, it's not so much about answering the questions, but about the experience of talking to others about these kinds of sensitive issues. Thank you in advance for your participation, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. It does feel like we're all just zipping through little wormholes back into the main session. The time in our breakout room went very, very fast. I don't know if that was the same for you. I see some responses going up on the Padlet now, which is fantastic. And just for anyone who wasn't actually able to access the Padlet, we're going to share the screen with you so that you can see some of those responses. But if you can't read that terribly well at the moment, don't worry too much, because a link to that will be on the LMS after the webinar as well. So you can always get to it and have a look and add your thoughts and responses there. We just have a couple of minutes. If anyone would like to talk about or just share with us how they found the activity. Was it comfortable or uncomfortable for you? Did you find that, talking to people you've just met about how you might respond to being told you've got a life-limiting illness, was that easy, hard, a bit unusual? Feel free to put your hand up, or you can type comments into the chat as well. I see there's a few things coming in there. But yes, please put your hand up if you do want to say something.
So it depends on the people that are in the room, yeah. So they're comfortable with their peers, perhaps, in this context.
Yep.
That's true.
Can you hear what? Oh, no.
No.
Kylie's reading through some of the chat there. I'm not sure if you can hear her on my microphone or not. Yes, the time did go fast.
So I'm wondering how Sue says it was different than face-to-face sessions, funnily enough. So Sue, do you want to elaborate on that in terms of how you think it was different to a face-to-face interaction?
Yeah, sure, Kylie. I felt that even though there's, at the moment there's 70+ people here, and trying to scroll through to see everyone's face, I don't get the feeling of sitting across the front of them, and you can get a certain vibe when you're in a classroom, I think. And so even though it took a little bit to kind of like connect with everyone, once we got chatting, it was fine. But you know what I mean? When you usually get broken up into groups, or you might gravitate towards people that you feel like, oh, I'll talk to them, kind of thing. So that was really interesting. I'm keeping my educator hat on with this kind of platform as well. So I'm just really mindful about how it might make people feel when, whether it's easier or not in this format.
Yep. Thank you. It's good to hear.
Looks like we have a question there from Linda as well.
Most felt fairly comfortable in this space to talk about it. In our room in particular, it was mentioned about the lower socioeconomic situation of William's story, and how difficult it is as a clinician to look at to teach our students to look at our patients through not just our own lens. So often we, not so heavy as judging, but rather just being able to see our patients through their own lens and how they're finding their experience. And so that was highlighted in our discussion really nicely cross-culturally as well. So, but all in all, the discussion we had was very, very inspiring and reflecting on our own personal experience with death and dying. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. That's good. We've probably got time for one more if there's one more person who has a thought or a comment that they'd like to make.
Thanks. May I just make hello, thank you. So I just want to make a comment following Suzanne's comment. Having been online with students now for 18 months and for the rest of the year in 2020, yuck. I just want to say that and having delivered PCC4U modules to third years, both face-to-face and online, I actually think that this online and the breakout rooms might work better for those students who have difficulty with that face-to-face conversation at such depth. So in one sense, this could be a protective factor, this webinar for them, the Zoom space, even though it's not my favourite delivery, but I think there's a strength for students who don't like or have anxiety looking face to face. So I just want to put both of those sides together.
Yes, thank you for that, Doris. I think that's something that we've heard echoed from other educators as well, that people are more comfortable interacting when they can type into a chat box instead of speaking out loud necessarily, and also being able to do anonymous responses as well. So yeah. We've got time for Julie's conversation. Julie, we'll have time for one more. Julie? One more Julie.
Just in response to that, Doris, I'm in the undergraduate program as well, and there's a unit I coordinate called Holistic Cancer Management, and it's only run for a few years in a new program, but last year was the first time we ran it as an online Zoom with breakout rooms. Previously, we'd done it face-to-face with a radiation oncologist and myself and another person to support. After the first 15 minutes, we gave the students a break, and the team of us sat down and said, well, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, let's have a drink, because we actually found it really difficult. We had students that were sobbing because some of the content, and I probably would never run those workshops again in an online platform. I actually think we couldn't really provide the support that the students needed, and if we can't deliver them face-to-face, I'm not going to do them again this year. So I had the reverse experience where I found it was very difficult. They just turned their microphones off and turned their cameras off, and some of them were quite distressed. So yeah, I wouldn't do that again.
That's interesting. Thanks, Julie, for sharing that. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap this little session up now to move on to our next part of our webinar. So yeah, I think the intention of those activities was really just to point out that that most people find talking about dying and death to be uncomfortable, and I think that's a key point to acknowledge. The activities that we've done are actually based on the content and thinking points from PCC4U Core Module 1, Section 1, so many of you might be familiar with that already. We find that doing warm-up activities that are fun can help people to engage in a less threatening way, and that focusing on a case scenario can help prompt self-reflection and support some personal sharing. Thank you so much for participating in those activities. I appreciate your thoughts and your responses and how they are continuing to come in using the chat and on the Padlet as well. So we do need to hand over now. I'll hand over to Kylie, who's going to introduce our guest presenter for today.
I'm really pleased to introduce Anna. I had the privilege of being able to see her a few years ago and the multidisciplinary panel that she presented, and she's going to discuss that today and be available to take some questions after. So thank you very much again, Dr. Hatton, for presenting today.
It's a pleasure to be able to share with you my experiences of teaching palliative care to undergraduate physiotherapy students. I'm going to discuss a model of learning that I've developed to introduce students to sensitive topics such as death and dying. And I'll explain how I've integrated PCC4U resources into a suite of authentic learning activities. First of all, though, let me set my teaching context. So I coordinate a Year 2 Bachelor of Physiotherapy Lifespan course, which primarily focuses on gerontology, yet comprises specialist modules, including palliative care and oncology. In terms of the learners themselves, there are approximately 130 students in the cohort, and about 64% are female. The mean age of the cohort is 21 years, and about 34% are international students, with around 28% of those being of Asian nationality. The majority of students enter the physiotherapy program directly from high school. One final demographic to bring to your attention is the percentage of time that my students spend with older people outside of university or work per week. Now, this data was collected from the 2016 cohort as part of an action learning project. Alarmingly, 50% of students reported that they spend no time with older people each week. This is really important, given that a large proportion of patients receiving palliative care will be older. And we know that frequent contact with patients improves students' confidence, communication, readiness for practice, and perceptions towards a clinical area. So taken together, the variety of life experience and wide range of emotional and educational maturity can influence how students respond to challenging topics such as death and dying. I've developed a 3-week palliative care module, which encompasses a suite of activities that gently scaffolds learning, providing a framework that lets students feel comfortable taking the next step in their learning about a potentially distressing topic. In week 1, the students engage with a series of lectures, which introduces the key principles of palliative care and the role of the physiotherapist in this clinical setting. Videos from the PCC4U Module 3, Herbert's Story, are interweaved within these lectures, providing students with a glimpse of how patients can react to receiving the diagnosis of a life-limiting illness, in this case, heart failure, and also some common symptoms that a physiotherapist may help to manage. So, for example, respiratory complications. Following these lectures, the students are asked to complete the PCC4U Module 1, Principles of Palliative Care, so William's story, and they do that in their own time, and this is to help embed what has been learned. Across weeks 2 to 3, the students take part in 2 practical classes, one being a communication training workshop designed for health professionals working in cancer care, and the second, a problem-based learning session where groups of students work together to reflect on the assessment and management of a patient with breast cancer. The final learning activity of the module is a live multidisciplinary team palliative care discussion panel, and that's structured around the PCC4U module Bob's Story. Now, bearing in mind that the PCC4U modules are intended for self-directed learning, I've used these resources in a novel way to create an interactive learning environment, which exposes the students to interprofessional teamwork by way of engaging the clinical community in student education. The discussion panel takes place in just a regular lecture theatre and involves between 4 to 5 senior health professionals from across Queensland's cancer services. Over the last 6 years, the panel has included members representing physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology, nursing, and medicine. We begin the session by playing the first vignette of PCC4U Module 4, which introduces Bob, a gentleman with motor neuron disease. The panel chair, which is myself, then poses several questions to the clinicians to extend key themes raised during the video. This cycle continues as we work through the remaining videos, during which the students witness Bob's deterioration, interjected with real-world stories from the panel discussing grief and loss, teamwork, and communication. Some initial reflections. So the representation of professions on the panel has evolved over time. For example, nursing was replaced with speech pathology, as the latter was more suited to Bob's clinical presentation, and there was considerable overlap between nursing and medicine. As an educator, I learned that less is more during this process. So the very first iteration of the discussion panel, I attempted to address 2 patient case studies in the 50-minute lecture slot. However, the breadth and depth of panel discussion and questions from the audience were so rich and involved that the second case was abandoned. So pretty much a case of quality over quantity. Having now run 7 iterations of the discussion panel, I'm really amazed that each year the issues raised are new, fresh, and insightful, despite addressing the same patient case study and involving largely the same panel members. This clearly demonstrates the different perspectives that each new cohort of students brings to the learning activity. In 2020, due to the COVID pandemic and need to move to online learning, the palliative care discussion panel was held via Zoom. All other aspects of the face-to-face discussion panel were retained, but I dare say that student engagement was higher using a virtual platform, with many posting questions to the panel via the chat function, which I think is likely a less threatening environment compared to verbally asking questions in a lecture theatre. Now, I just want to share with you a selection of questions asked by students during the dedicated question and answer discussion time to give you an idea of the thoughts and reflections this learning activity can provoke. So a couple of questions are, how do you deliver brutal information such as a poor prognosis to a patient with a life-limiting illness? How do you learn to sit in discomfort with a patient? For example, if you just don't know what to say to them. Is having the time and structural support for multidisciplinary teamwork more important in palliative care compared to other clinical areas or specialties? How do you manage conflict between a patient and their caregiver or family member? And what strategies do you use as a healthcare professional to deal with your own grief when a patient dies? Now, physiotherapy students are generally very practical. They focus on hands-on skills and are keen to learn treatments that aim to fix the problem, like massage or manipulation techniques. So to be met with really deep and complex questions, focusing on communication strategies, self-care and teamwork was incredibly encouraging. Keeping in mind that these students are in their early years of their professional training, and so they're still learning about the role and scope of practice of a physiotherapist. Other topics of discussion that have arisen include advanced health directives, power of attorney, statement of choices, euthanasia, and so legislation aspects around end-of-life care. Having an awareness of how students may respond to learning about end-of-life care is incredibly important to ensure you have the appropriate support strategies in place. For the most part, students have shown overwhelming enthusiasm towards the palliative care module, with the discussion panel frequently praised within their formal course evaluations, and in particular, noting the usefulness of the PCC4U video resources. However, not all students respond well, as you'll see from the following anonymous email snapshots. In 2016, I had one student faint in the lecture theatre when shown images of a patient with breast cancer. The content was just too close to home due to a family member having breast cancer at that time. In 2020, a student contacted me with concerns of feeling distressed when engaging with lecture content discussing terminal illness and grief and loss. Whilst these students tend to be in the minority and reactions of this nature are few, it's a good reminder that some students are in the process of developing resilience and emotional maturity and learning self-care strategies. And there's every likelihood that emotions could be raised when exposed to sensitive topics such as palliative care. Now, student support can be provided via several avenues. Personally, I maintain twice weekly communication or check-ins with students, providing advance warnings of any potentially distressing material prior to class. These heads-up notices are communicated via the student's online learning platform or a simple opening slide at the start of a lecture. Directing students to formal and independent support networks, such as university counselling services, and providing relevant contact details is also really important. And additionally, making myself available to meet with any students who feel more comfortable sharing their concerns with perhaps academic staff with whom they're more familiar. So I hope this has provided some food for thought about new ways to teach palliative care to undergraduate students across the health professions, and importantly, novel ways to implement the PCC4U learning resources. Many physiotherapy students begin their degree with aspirations of pursuing a career on the sports field, and often with little knowledge of the different clinical areas in which physiotherapists can work. Learning about end-of-life care is not even an afterthought. Therefore, a little creativity, imagination, and careful scaffolding of learning activities can help to lessen the blow and support students in learning about one challenging reality of healthcare. Thank you.
We do have some time now if there are people who have finished their polling and would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, hi, I'm Liz from one of the RTOs teaching this particular unit, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts are about the amount of time that should be allocated to teach all of these modules, in that we have a specific framework in which we roll out our units, and I'm just curious from your perspective what you would consider to be a reasonable amount of time for students to have to do all these modules, etc., over what sort of week period, how many weeks, etc.
And in the RTO setting, are you using the Enrolled Nurse Toolkit, Liz, or the Care Worker Toolkit? Yep.
Enrolled Nurse.
Do you want to answer that one?
It totally depends on the teaching learning strategies that people are using at times in terms of the length of time they're delivering. We have understanding that some programs are delivering over sort of 4 weeks, where some will be teaching a period of 8 weeks to deliver the unit of competency with the EM toolkit. So it depends on their teaching strategies as well.
Okay, yeah, terrific. Thanks.
I was just wondering what some people's opinions are on the notion that students get distressed discussing these topics, and they are difficult topics, but at the same time they've chosen a career pathway where it's highly likely they're going to be working in this area, and it's probably better to be distressed and exposed now than, you know, when they're protected and we can wrap up and look after them, compared to when they're out on placement or work. And I just wanted to see, is there any strategies people are using at the moment to get the students in and participating in the class if they're scared to do so? Because it looked like from Anna's presentation, she got a couple of emails after the fact saying, by the way, sorry, I didn't attend. So like,
did you want to answer that one, Anna?
Oh, I can try to. Gosh, I think it's very It's very difficult, particularly given the wide variety of experiences within a class as well. So speaking in terms of physiotherapy, we've got some mature students who have come back to uni to do physio. There's students who have come straight from high school. Some have got older family members who have died. Others haven't had that experience. And so being able to manage that on an individual basis is really challenging. I think the benefit of having face-to-face sessions and putting students into smaller groups rather than having that threatening full lecture theatre is really useful. And again, I guess the main strategies that I've used personally is just to encourage the students to come and speak with me if they're not dealing with engaging with that content. And given the fact that it's maybe attached to assessment and they need to cover that content, maybe looking at how we can package it or restructure it in a less threatening approach, which probably doesn't give you a definitive answer, but that's maybe some of the ways and strategies that I've used.
I think it's quite important with scaffolding as well, particularly in RTO context, that where the palliative care unit of competencies are placed in the teaching structure, making sure that things like communication subjects are properly taught first. And ideally, I know it's not always possible, but ideally that students have been out on placement before they start talking about palliative concepts as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know I was speaking for physiotherapy again. We have little pots of information about palliative care which spread across the years. So it's not all in, say, my second year course. They get a bit of an intro to palliative care, death and dying, grief and loss in that course. And then they will readdress it again in later years when they're building up a bit more understanding about the profession, different types of patients, and learning a bit more about themselves as well.
Thank you. Steph, just wondering if you could share that last slide that just has the details of the LMS so that people know where to go to. We can continue taking some questions though, if there are more questions for Anna or for the PCC4U team.
Hey, it's John Rosenberg here. These are going to be scheduled regularly, I hope.
Yes, we're planning on doing a monthly webinar session. We just wanted to see people's opinions about days and times before we plan.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's right.
The whole year.
Sorry.
Yeah. If you do go onto the LMS and register, you'll see a list of topics there. We just put in randomly webinar 2 and a topic, webinar 3 and a topic. So we'd really love your feedback on that to say, you know, what kinds of things do you want these to be about? What's most helpful? And, you know, that may vary depending on the sector that you're in, but yeah, absolutely. If you do have more feedback, I realise the Zoom poll only allows a certain amount of information to come through. So please email us. That is pcc4u@qut.edu.au with any other feedback about the webinar. Great. Oh, yeah, it's being put into the chat as well. Thanks, Linda. It's like having a little team of magic people.
It's very efficient.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
No, it's been excellent to be part of this today. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for participating.
And so I wonder, while we've got Anna on the line still, if no one else seems to be having the question, I wonder, Anna, if you wanted to comment on how you have adapted the PCC4U resources, which are discipline non-specifics on the website, how you've actually looked at applying the requirements for a physiotherapy program.
Yeah, I think it's not so much about adapting them specifically for physiotherapy. I think they offer a really good opportunity to introduce the students to interprofessional teamwork, and you know, it gives them an opportunity to learn about the roles of different professions, and maybe thinking about physiotherapy in terms of where do our professional boundaries start and end in comparison to other professions, and you know, who takes responsibility for different treatments or different assessments for a patient. So it's certainly raised a lot of questions from students about, you know, where's the line between, say, what do we do as a physiotherapist compared to an occupational therapist? And so having that multidisciplinary team discussion panel has helped to smooth out some of those issues and concerns that the student have had in the past. So yeah, I think it's an opportunity to expose them to a range of different professions rather than just keeping them tightly knit within the physiotherapy discipline.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Comments, questions? I think the chat's basically. Yeah, I think if we've got no more questions coming through, then we might sign off for today. We have got a discussion forum on our on the course on the LMS as well. So we've put just a couple of topics up there for people to add their thoughts and ideas into. And we've also put some links up there to some of the frequently asked questions for PCC4U for universities and for RTOs. So if you are new to the resources, then that might be a great first starting point as well. So thank you all very much for participating today. I've really appreciated seeing so many faces online, and stay tuned to hear about the next one. Oh, Sue, the LMS, I should have said it in full at the beginning, learning management system. That's where our resources are stored for the Enrolled Nurse Toolkit, the Care Worker Toolkit, the simulation scenarios, and also this Educator Community Hub. So thank you for that. Thanks. No problem. The link is, I think Kylie's just put it into the chat. It's palliativecareeducation.com.au. And if you go there and create an account, here we go. Oh, Steph's put it on the screen. This is fantastic support here. Create an account and then go to the Educator Community and sign up for the Educator Webinars 2021. And then you'll get lots and lots of information. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you next time.